How's it going, everybody? I'm your host, Redbeard. Welcome to the Sentinels of Liberty podcast. Scott will be joining us shortly. But before we do that, just a couple things for Saturday. Um, I still haven't narrowed it down to what I would like to do for on Saturday, but I'm thinking I may do another Washington's Warnings episode. I'm not sure how well you guys like that. It was a little bit more structured, a little bit more formal, but I think I feel like it went over fairly well. So I'm going to try and do a couple more of those and kind of gauge things. But in the end of the day, I think having something a little bit more structured that way is going to be very beneficial. A little bit about Scott Horton. He's the director of the Libertarian Institute. He's the editorial director for antiwar.com. He's done over 6,000 interviews, written several books such as Provoked, which is the new one, Fool's Errands, and Enough Already. He also has the Scott Horton Show and does a podcast with Daryl Cooper, also known as Provoked. I will be putting links in the description below for you guys and gals to check all of that stuff out. Really, really good stuff. Really enjoy a lot of the work that he does. And the people over at antiwar.com are fantastic people. And I hope you guys are every bit as excited to have Scott here as I am, and being able to lend his insights and a lot of the things that he's done work on over the several years. So buckle up. It's going to be a good one. We're going to be discussing some stuff that we kind of left off on a little bit earlier, but at the same time, hopefully covering a little bit new ground. And I'm going to see if maybe he can possibly provide some information pertaining to Maidan and some of the buildup that occurred to 2014, just to give a little frame of reference. Additionally, to that point, like, it is in his book, but I always think it's nice being able to get the person that wrote the book to talk about some of that stuff. And if you remember anything like last time, Scott is a wealth of knowledge. And I have no doubt that he's going to be willing to discuss, elaborate, and kind of expound upon these issues. I feel like they're very important issues, and to a lot of people looking from the outside in, I feel like they very much do not only affect the United States, but they affect Europe as a whole. And so as a result, I feel it's worth paying attention to these situations, to these issues, to all of these goings on, because invariably what we do abroad, or rather what our governments do abroad, invariably always comes back home to us. And I mentioned that during my Entangling Alliance episode or video that I did, and I hope you, that was one of the Washington's Warning, or that was the first of the Washington's Warnings video, and I hope you guys really got something out of that. I tried to put it together to the best of my ability to be very information driven and have a clear set of points and things for you guys and gals to follow along on. And so as we're looking out, kind of keep in the back of your mind as we go through some of this stuff, the realm of entangling alliances, not just as Americans, but also people who live in Europe and all over the place, and really step back to consider, some of the things that your governments do, and really like what benefit it ultimately brings to you. And hopefully after we go through our episode tonight and we share the information, we talk about the information, we're able to hopefully paint a picture as to all the chaos, the catastrophe, and some of the events that led up to the current war conflagration between Russia and Ukraine, the US's involvement, and the really just the ongoing and perpetual like pushing along, it seems, of this situation, and the lack of wanting to relent in this position by many European leaders, by many in the United States, like Lindsey Graham and so many others. So I'm really excited to talk about this, and I hope all of you are excited too. I'm going to go through the comments here real quick while we're waiting for Scott to pop in here, and just say hi to everybody. So let's take a look here real quick. Who do we have in the house? Gene the Machine. Great to see you, man. I know I already put that in the comments, but it definitely merits saying. Gene the Machine, you are a rock star, dude. You have supported this podcast from day one. You were there when I was doing it with Mark with the Mission Critical podcast. You are an OG, man, and I really, really appreciate you stopping in, spending some time with us. I know it's late over there, and so it's really, really greatly appreciated. And I think you're more than deserving of the title of Gene the Machine. So I decree. Centerline Systems, great to see you, brother. Always a pleasure having you in here, providing some commentary, keeping the chat going. Really, really do appreciate it. David Andert, it's always good to have you here. And let's see who else trickling in here. Chuck, my man, it's great to have you. Really appreciate you stopping in also and spending some time with us tonight. I hope for everybody that comes in that the episode is informative as well as engaging. So great to see you, Chuck. What are some of the comments here? Mark, woo, roll on CLS in the winter. Heck yeah. Centerline Systems gear, great stuff. I have, I don't want to say I have as big of a collection as some people, but I have enough to know that it's pretty good quality gear. Mark, there's a shout out for you, buddy. Just take it. Just take the shout out. Okay. So I'm not giving you an option on this one. Let's see. And in the same with the UK, what we do overseas comes home to us at some point. That's a fantastic point, Gene. Really, it really does. And it doesn't really matter where you're from or where you live or whatever the case is. It always invariably tends to point inwards. And so I think that's a really good point, really good observation, especially from somebody who is from across the pond, as your name implies. So thank you for that. The war machine forever rolls on. Yes, it does. And there's a lot of people that want to see it that way. There's a lot of people that would like for this conflict and in this war essentially just to continue on, and between Russia and Ukraine, and when you evaluate the complicity of NATO in that, and you look at all of the different things that NATO's done, several of the countries, many of the countries, but the United States being a very big primary driver of that, as well as the UK and eventually Germany, right? There really is a pattern that tends to start. So let's see. Just have to highlight it, Chuck. Thanks, man. I really appreciate you stopping in here. I love this one. Token wins whenever I can. Absolutely. Seriously. You know what? I'm also going to put Centerline's website in the description below too. Go support a local company. The guy and his seamstress do a fantastic job. Sewer. They do amazing jobs, and really their gear is, in my opinion, it's definitely worth the price. All you have to do just grab one product, test it. You'll see it for yourself. I stand by that as somebody who has, I have an OG belt, and I've mentioned this before, but I have an OG belt from Mark at Centerline Systems, and it's still robust, still rugged, and still holds up today. So I guess that's an expounded upon shameless plug, but seriously, he makes real gear for real people. So I will put your stuff in the description down below. If you can discuss specific for not only Gene, but all of us has the UK. Yeah, I mean, this is something that I think is kind of worth discussing too. I'll see what I'm sure Scott will probably have a position on this as well, considering it. It's when we talk about NATO, we talk about a lot of the different ramifications that come with NATO, and seriously, I mean, there's a lot, and I think it kind of goes without saying that the UK, along with Germany, are really kind of in the hurt locker right now. And I think that's going to be something we may potentially explore too. But look, I think I think some of the last estimates that I heard from Doug McGregor, Colonel Douglas McGregor, and I think Larry Johnson, and I believe John Mearsheimer and a few others had mentioned that I'm pretty sure that the UK only has about 30,000 like fieldable, like fighting, like ground troops, right? And with like an overall composition of, I think, somewhere around 75,000 in total. So when you think about that, I mean, think about one of our football stadiums. Think about one of our football stadiums, and when you put that into perspective, right? That's pretty insane. And Germany is going through some of their own issues. Both places are having a very, very difficult time recruiting enough people to go forth into their militaries because a lot of people just really don't have the appetite for war. And it's the same thing here. People have lost their appetite for war. And I feel like a lot of people ultimately have this idea or this notion that that if they go in the military, all they're going to find is warfare. And I hate to say it, but there is quite a pattern that implies that. So I hope this is a pretty good primer before Scott comes on and eclipses even my knowledge by a far margin. Yeah, definitely. While we have some time, bring in shoot some comments to me if you got questions or whatever. I can try to prime those questions a little bit beforehand, and hopefully we can get ourselves set for a good basis. Also, a little bit here, Centerline Systems. Yeah, I'm pretty sure it's a decade old. If memory serves, I'm pretty sure it's nearly a decade old, which really, again, is a testament to the craftsmanship and the quality of the belt itself. Matter of fact, hold on. I'm gonna do something. I only did this one time prior, but I just want to show you what the belt looks like here. This is for you, Mark. This is for you. So you can kind of see the patina and the wear on the belt. It stood up really, really well. You can see some of the detail that's still set in. If I can hold it normal. And you can see that there's definitely some wear, right? I mean, but look at the Velcro even. Yeah, the Velcro's worn, and the emblem just rocking as always, right? So, yeah, I mean, if this is a testament to the type of gear and the belts that Mark makes over at Centerline Systems. So I had to do that for him because I know he gets super giddy anytime I show this belt. Because this is, I'm pretty sure this is literally like the first edition belt that he ever made. One of the first runs are in the series. So great belt. He makes great stuff. Mark, big shout out to you, man. I had to do it. I know Scott will be on here pretty soon, but I had to do it. I had to plug you, man, because seriously, it is a stellar piece of kit. So it's the Legacy Belt OG #1. Yeah, I mean, I'm pretty sure that's what it is. I think it was from the first original batch, Gene, if I remember correctly. So, yeah, so we'll see. We shall see. But I appreciate everybody taking time to join us this evening as a primer. It's I know Scott had a few things that he was working on trying to get finished before he came on, so we're just patiently waiting for him to pop on, but the show will continue forth. So one of the other things that I also was thinking about as well is when we look at just overall, the nature of how the war machine, or the empire rather, the way that it operates or it works, is very interesting. Not just as it pertains to Russia, Ukraine, NATO, whatever the case is, but recently we just had stuff go on in Venezuela, with a boat that I guess was in international waters, but like Larry Johnson and several others had brought up. Yeah. I love how you knew exactly where that was going. Like Larry Johnson, Doug McGregor, and so many other fantastic minds had brought up. They say they struck this boat, but really, in the end of the day, okay, support some evidence. You say there's drugs on there. You say it was cartel members. Okay, but like, you verify that. We're beyond the age of like, oh yeah, like I guess that's just what it was. Now we're beyond that, because really, like, the realm of trust and the realm of integrity, as it pertains to just believe me, bro, is it's over. And this idea that first off, like, what are like, what is the long-term plan? Like you say, like, oh, we're going to go deal with the drug dealers. We're going to go deal with this. But what is the long-term plan? Nobody's explained what the long-term plan is beyond like, oh, well, like, they're bad people. Okay. Typically somebody who's organized actually has some form of a plan. And, it's crazy because, this is a pattern that we've seen, I hate to say it, but very prominently in this administration as it is. And, it's one that I really would hope that is going to break. But in the end of the day, I just am not convinced that we're going to see this pattern break. This is the same MO in the same way that they prime so many other things that ultimately it's just not believable anymore. It's just not believable. And oh, well, we're going to go do this. Okay, elaborate on that. Then nobody can elaborate on it. It's like the running joke always goes, like you could get some of these people that cheer for war, whether it's Ukraine, Iraq, Afghanistan, whatever the case is. There's a lot of these people that, like, they may have voted way back in the day to go to these places, but if you asked them to find it on a map, or like what some basic information is about these places, many of them, they couldn't even tell you, right? And what does that say? I mean, especially when you have people like Ted Cruz that professes to be so faithful and so whatever, and and I say this in a way of, he runs his mouth a lot, as do a lot of these people. And it's like, okay, if you're going to say this and you're going to say all of these things, whether it's pertaining to like, oh, I'm this, or, we're just doing this, like, you better have some explanation. You better be able to provide some details. You better be able to have some good supporting evidence, because in the end of the day, if you can't do that, like, the believability and the support for your case really is just not going to be there. And I think we're at a point now to where it's just like, oh, like, they were drug dealers. They had drugs. Okay. But like that, it doesn't matter. Like, you need to make sure, because I'm here to tell you, if it isn't what you say it is, if it's not what you say it is, and somebody finds out that it's not what you say it is, it's going to look pretty bad. And it still looks really bad. The fact that we even sent warships over there, like, what are you doing? So, I mean, it's already just a mess of a situation as it is. And to be completely honest, I think the fact that we're continuing this current trajectory, and then you have a president and an administration that supports this idea of like, oh, like, we're not, I'm anti-war. Like, no, like, Scott Horton is anti-war. Ron Paul is anti-war. Thomas Massey is more anti-war than you are. Like, there are people that are legitimately anti-war, and in the sense of like, hey, you don't just get to go around and just start all of these illegal actions and all of these things and then say they're not war when they constitute war. That's not how that works. So, and you know, the Centerline also, there is a situation to where, yeah, I mean, it's not beyond the U.S. government to take particular actions against Americans that are overwhelmingly criminal, whether it's assassinations or otherwise. We know that there's a pattern of this. We know that it happens, and we know it continues to happen to today. You know, especially if you want to get into the realm of, you know, I think there's, I think the number is like somewhere upwards of like 270 reporters have been killed in Gaza, like thus far. And there's a number of them that are Americans, and yet not a peep at all. So, I mean, what does that tell you? What does that paint the picture of? And I would have to say, it's pretty astonishing to me. So I just want to, any truth, it was named the son of Biden. I have, yeah, it could be, you know, it could be, but, you know, I'm not sure. But, you know, just give it some time. You know, Trump's going to come out and he's going to be like, it was the greatest interdiction ever. Okay. We did the greatest thing. We've got all the drugs, you know, we got all of them, all of the drugs, you know. We didn't leave a single bad guy alive. You know, it was the greatest operation ever. We're so great. Okay. I looked at the operation and I was like, wow, you know, this is the greatest operation. It's coming. Okay. Like it may already be here, but it's coming if it hasn't. So just be prepared for that. Yeah, it's, we did a drone strike on him when his kid was in the car. Both were me. Yeah. Yeah, dude. I mean, so that kind of speaks for itself. Wow, it was the greatest drone strike ever. Okay, it's gonna be so huge. The next one's just gonna be amazing. You know, I mean, I'm just saying, dude. You know, I mean, it always comes. It always comes, and it's. I'd lie if I said that it wasn't actually kind of funny, but you know, such is life. Such is life. So I am just going to look up a few things here real quick. Holy crap. Let's see. Yeah, I've started to find that I do have some impersonations that I'm able to do kind of well. There's others that I can do pretty well. But for whatever reason, I got bored one day, and I'm here to tell you, like when you're a driver and you drive a truck and all of that, you have a lot of time, and so I just practice impersonations and listen to Scott Horton's podcast episodes and as well as many others, and you know, I mean, what can I say? You know, it's the greatest thing in the world. You know, it's so. But to be fair, Shane Gillis, that guy of all guys, does one of the he does hands down one of the best impersonations, in my opinion, of Trump. So if you haven't seen Shane Gillis's impersonations, highly recommend that you do. So let's see here. Let's see. He makes a better Trump than Trump. I'm the greatest Trump, okay? You know, and the Trump is so good. You know, we're gonna do big things, all right? So I mean, yeah, if you've never seen Shane Gillis or whatever, but 100%, there's an impersonation compilation that he does. It's absolute comedy gold. So, let's see. Yeah, so but I guess in the end of the day, kind of cutting through all of that, really, it becomes a situation. I think when you look at the realm of NATO, Russia, Ukraine, you look at the buildup, you look at everything that happened after, um, on the boat. I if it's the boat thing, I kind of answered. I'm pretty sure I answered the question. Like I just think it's ridiculous. Why we're over there to begin with? Like one strike on a boat is worthless. I want proof that they are who they were. I want proof that there was drugs on that boat. I want proof that we didn't just frag a bunch of people. That maybe unknowingly, drugs were built into the boat. Like in the end of the day, like the overall, it's wrong. It's absolutely wrong, hands down. Like our principally, constitutionally, all of it is absolutely wrong. So it's like there's nothing whatsoever that is even justifiable. Like this is a pattern, right? It's this whole thing of just like, oh, we've got to go at the world with a cudgel. We've got to go at the world with a battering ram. We've got to be able to, just overtake all of this, all of these problems with just like the most blunt instrument possible. And over, moreover, let me just posit this to you, and this isn't my own thing. I think it was done by a guy named Harry or Henry Brown. I can't remember his first name, but he posited this idea of just like to give you an idea of how effective the government is of preventing drugs, of actually fighting a quote unquote drug war. All you have to do is look at federal prison institutions in the United States and look at how many drugs, how many weapons, how many illicit things are trafficked in and out of there every single day. And that'll give you your answer as to how effective a drug war is. A drug war is no different than the war on terrorism, the war on anything. Anytime that you declare a war, it becomes this whole monstrosity in and of itself. And ultimately, it just becomes this overarching thing that it ends up, it becomes one of these things to where you ultimately as individuals, right? Like the people that live in the United States, like all the wars that we've had contemporarily, right, it ultimately usurps liberty and in the rights of the American people. There's maybe on one hand, and that's a strong like maybe, on one hand, how many that we've been in that have been wholly like within the parameters, and that's a really strong maybe. This whole thing of like this war against the cartels, and then subsequently you have the strike on the boat. I mean, then what? Then are they going to complain? If what they want, at this point, I'm almost convinced that they want blowback. I'm almost convinced that they want something to happen. They want to incite something to happen so they can justify gearing up and going and mowing over what other country or whatever. And like, I think it was Douglas McGregor today who said that if you go back and you fundamentally look, or no, it was Dave DeCamp. I'm sorry, on Dave Smith's podcast. And I totally agree with him. If you look at this is the same pattern for regime change, and that's what it's about. It's not about the drugs in Venezuela. If it was about the drugs in if it was about the drugs in South America, well, you better go through the CIA and a whole bunch of other people if you want to figure out where a bunch of this stuff is coming from. I mean, let's be honest. Let's see. let's see, dude, you guys don't have military capacity and capability versus the Houthis, Iranians, Russians, even Venezuela can't fight a ground war, only standoff weapons from far away. It's one of those things to where I think that's very, it's a very interesting point, because when you genuinely look, and this has been alluded to by numerous people at this point, you genuinely look at the capacity of the U.S. arsenal as it is. I mean, we have pretty much outsourced a majority of our arms, our armaments, munitions, stuff like that. I mean, we are at dangerously low levels. And not only that, though, but there's got to be some type of a turnaround. There's got to be some type of reform. There's got to be something that's going to give, because if we don't start to fix these things, I mean, at this point, I mean, I know a lot of people are going to argue against this, but I mean, we're almost to a point to where it's going to be very hard to fight our way out of a wet paper bag if we continue to do this. And look, in the end of the day, like, it was always meant to be defensive. Like, we were never meant to be an empire. We were never meant to empire build. We were never intended to just wage these never-ending conquesting wars of offense, and go after the world with a cudgel. That's not how it was intended to be. And as a result, it becomes a very precarious situation. Let's see. So, I mean, the War Powers Act, War Powers Resolution, in and of itself should not even exist. They came after it with this whole thing, right? Of, we've got to restrain, we've got to, put some restraints, and we've got to confine, right, the president and in the power. But the problem is, if the problem is instead of restraining, instead of bringing restraints, it empowered the president, it empowered the executive, and gave them arbitrary power, to go forth and to do whatever they want. It's absolutely, and don't even sit there and begin to give me this whole thing about, like, well, it's 90 days. No, 90 days. Once you're 90 days into a war, right? Because that's what it is by the definition. A war, by our founders' definition, and I've gone over this before, the aggression of one sovereign to another, one sovereign to another individual of any capacity, right? This whole 90-day thing. Once you're that deep into it, you really think that all of a sudden we're just going to be like, all right, like, I guess because there hasn't been a determination, we just have to pack up and go home. That has never been the case. And moreover, the beautiful thing for all of these would-be tyrants and these warmongers and all of these people, right, is because it's not an official war, which we haven't had a formal declaration of war in a very long time, mind you. You know what you get for not having that? You don't have to get the responsibility of having American sons and daughters, fathers and mothers slaughtered in a war. So you can avoid all of that responsibility to the end of your days. Because, it's absolutely ridiculous. So, I mean, look, take it for what you will, but it's the War Powers Act resolution is an absolute abysmal, arbitrary thing that not only is absolutely I don't want to just make it, but it's absolutely repugnant to the Constitution or the proper function of how our government is supposed to be, and so it's just it's crazy. I mean, if we're being honest, I don't know of any time in recent times, even I would even say past World War One, or even before, like even in and around the time of World War One, that there really hasn't been a war that this government, the United States government, really hasn't looked at and was like, you know, I could kind of get into that. So let's see. Hey, absolutely appreciate you being here. Let's see. But because the lack of interest people have in wanting to join our, but we probably have the weakest military we've ever had. You know, it's yeah, you know, I don't necessarily think it's that. I think a lot of the people in power, like, I'm not saying that that's definitely not part of it, but I think people not wanting to go into the military is a byproduct of one, just war exhaustion. People they don't want to be a part of it, or involved in war, time and time and time and again, and I definitely understand that. You know, from just somebody who views it from the outside perspective and not like an active or former member. But it's like, even as just like a person in day-to-day life, when all you see for the last like 25 or more years, right, like numerous decades, all you've really seen is like war. I mean, again, we've been fighting the Somalis for over 30 years, like, or around 30 years. There was just this year alone, 68 bombings in Somalia. Like, we bombed Somalia 68 times. That broke Trump's previous record of 63 times of his previous presidency. So, I mean, use that information what you will. Take that information and use it what you will, but it's egregious. It's really, really egregious. So yeah, in the end of the day, I guess it just the pattern is just irrefutable. I mean, and it's not, when we talk also about regime change, I mean, and you look at how many we've been involved in, and then you look at, you know, like, they talked about Venezuela. Rubio talked about Venezuela in the very first Trump presidency, and here we are. You know, again, if you think the Venezuela thing is you really think that that's about drugs, I don't know, man. I mean, there is an off chance that I could be wrong, but I mean, they also said a lot of stuff that was not verifiable to support their claims about Iran, and we bombed them anyways when we didn't even have to. Oh, and not only did we bomb Iran, we killed the freaking negotiators from Iran. So, I mean, that's the other thing the government has that does, is they kill the negotiators. Like, I don't understand where this even started to be a thing, but it's become a thing. The only caveat is between like the Russia-Ukraine thing. But I'm sure, you know, at some point, if things continue going the same way that they're going right now, that it's probably not far off. I mean, so, I mean, take that for what you will. It really just stands to reason that it's an absolute cycle of chaos. Just as a quick update, I am doing a little bit of back and forth and some housekeeping here. There's a possibility that we may have to postpone the episode because I think there may be some unforeseen things, which, if that's the case, totally understand. It's fine. I know that things happen. It is what it is. So I'm monitoring that. But worst case scenario, we're having a pretty good discussion as it is. And I think it's definitely worth discussing. I mean, there's a lot of different things that are going on right now. But notwithstanding, I do really feel that this government has unfortunately taken a position of cudgel diplomacy, and on top of that, just this disposition of, if you don't come around to do things our way, if you don't come around to do the things that we want you to do, we don't come around to do to agree to the terms that we set, as opposed to us, or our government being reasonable, rational terms, right? You can kind of see that how this spells out, right? And we were close. Like the United States was relatively close to really kind of having a decent cooperating situation with the Indians and India and Modi. Now Modi doesn't even pick up the phone for Trump. Really, and this administration thinks that this works, that this is functional foreign policy. Oh, we don't like what you stop buying that Russian oil. Stop buying all of this. Dude, the West and the United States are still the point is it doesn't even have to be a lot from Russia. It still stands to the point that we're still buying a ton of we're still buying enough stuff from Russia as well as Western Europe, to the point to where their whole argument of we're gonna put tariffs on you and sanctions on you for buying that. Okay, then sanction yourself, tariff yourself. At this point, you're an absolute hypocrite. This is foreign policy that is cartoonish at its core. Nobody takes it seriously. And again, Modi just stopped picking up his phone calls. It's at what point, do you actually have to wake up and be gee, we've done this for so long and it's not working. So what we're going to do? We're just going to keep doing the same thing, because surely there's going to be another outcome or an expected result, right? I don't know that that's the case. And I guarantee, I would actually argue, not only does it not hold up to being the case, but there's patterns that show that this is not the case. It's insanity is what it is. And it's, there's not, and so here's another thing that I want to put forth. Okay. Anybody that talks about the foreign policy of the United States, the way that we do things, peace through strength, right? Peace through strength. How does that work out for you? I'll tell you how it's worked. If you really want to know, it's got us involved in more wars. We've changed more regimes than we know what to do with. We're still bombing countries 30 years later. We allow people to just get slaughtered and ethnically cleansed in places like genocide, or in Gaza, genocide. But we use this peace through strength, but yet everybody that we even remotely had the potential to have a working relationship with, aside from a bunch of little dependable people in Western Europe, are walking away from us. Peace through strength ultimately is? Instead of peace through trade, peace through diplomacy, a joke. And it's just this bully mentality of oh, well, if you don't do the thing, that we want you to do, we'll show you. No, it's ridiculous. It's absolutely ridiculous. And again, it's such a rebuke to the Constitution of this country. And look, I'm well aware that at this juncture we are in empire mode as the United States, right? I mean, you don't not get to be an empire with over 750 plus military bases around the world in however many countries that all adds up to be. But look, I mean, and if you want more of an expounding on that, go back to my Washington's warnings regarding entangling alliances a couple episodes ago, and I kind of lay out a really, I hope a rational and well-reasoned argument or presentation over there. But look, like it really does become this situation to where it's just not viable. But yet they continue to do the same thing over and over again, and that's not even counting the fact that the United States, at its word, cannot be taken seriously. Right? At its word, it can't be taken seriously. I mean, look at so many of the examples strewn over the past 30, 40 years of us saying like, oh, no, it's not going to be a big deal, And what was the not 1 inch eastward was one of the famous quotes that a lot of people use. Not 1 inch east, right? Well, the Soviets back in the day, they were like, okay, like we'll concede, making Germany whole. Okay. We'll concede making Germany whole. Whatever. It is what it is. Okay. Well, I mean, 2025, NATO's just eating up everything, like, and if you go back and you look at, it's one of these things to where when you look at the evolution of those conversations, when you go back and you look at Scott Horton's book, for instance, Provoked, right? In the way that he lays it out, I mean, it's ridiculous. It's indefensible in my opinion, in my personal opinion, and it's not, after doing so many things and during that period, that era, but in addition to all of the different things that we told Saddam, all of the different things that we brokered in and around the Middle East. I mean, if you really want a banger of just how crazy the situation is, really deep dive the Iran-Contra. Like really like pull back those layers. I mean, the onion is thick, and it's and in the end of the day, like in my only point of contention to the peace through strength is the fact that like if all you do is bring a cudgel to every diplomatic venture, you're going to be met with a reaction that like is either just going to piss you off all the time because people are like, no, like we didn't even come here with a cudgel, like I don't think going in walking invariably entirely with this whole strength mentality is how you properly negotiate. Like there's so many more effective ways without having to bring a cudgel or a gun to a diplomatic conversation. And in the end of the day, like we just don't do it anymore. Like a long time ago, we used to actually be able to just sit down with people without even having to air out this idea of like, well, if you don't agree with us, then I guess we'll just have to use our strength option. Because the moment we started doing that is the moment when everybody started getting pissed off at us. like it really like, and I think there's a big misconception with the whole peace through strength thing of like, oh, we have to like put our strong foot forward. Like, no, like, what the real strength is? Allowing it to sit idly in the background and not say a fucking thing about it and just be a rational human being and sit down and talk to people with a sense of like, that you're on the same, general playing field. It might be skewed a little bit, but in the end of the day, like, let's be honest. Like, if you're really that strong, if you're really that effective, if you're really that successful, like if you're really that capable, some of the most capable, successful people that existed in this country and all over the world never had to sit there and run their fucking mouths about how successful and strong and capable they are, because when it came down to it, they let their actions speak without having to sit there and brag about it, without having to put it forward. So no, like I this may be a point of contention, and that's fine. Like, this is the whole point of this. But in the end of the day, it's one of those things. But you don't even have to ask to be left alone if you don't go forth into the world and fuck with people's shit to begin with. It's not even a thing. Like, and unfortunately, being left alone was one of those things where you weren't going out and ruining other people's toys and then saying, how dare you come and attack me? That's called blowback. Okay. Like, you don't get the option to go forth into the world and fuck with people's shit and then sit there and act like, oh, you came in and hurt my people? Really? Like, it just, like, on its face, in my humble opinion, it doesn't work. It just doesn't work. You know, like, it's the strength comes when you don't have to say anything. And then if things really degrade and you get attacked, then you let that option go when there's no other options left. But you don't sit there and talk about how strong you are, talk about how successful you are. Because in the end of the day, one, you're probably neither. And two, why should anybody take you seriously to begin with? Like, and look, that applies not just to the United States. That applies to a lot of people. Like, a lot of people could really, really benefit from shutting the fuck up. Like, I'm just saying, like, and if you actually just focused on fixing your own countries, building a defensive military, right, and not wandering around the world creating chaos, then yeah, you know, like, you probably are going to be pretty strong. Because real strength, real peace through strength, it's showing people, it's showing people, not talking about it, showing people, hey, look at this country through example in action, how free we are. Look at our country of how robust we are by example in action, right? You don't have to talk about those things. You don't have to bring that stick to a negotiation. If you're that damn good, people are going to know going into that negotiation, wow, like, these people are bringing a lot to bear. Your actions and the way that you set things up should speak for themselves. So I don't agree with it. And I think that most people that, well, I shouldn't say most people, but I think when you look at that general interpretation, it's this idea of, like, bringing to bear, like, this argument of, like, oh yeah, we have the crazy capability. It's, you know, like, this is what can happen. Like, no, you don't even need to say that. Like, if you're really that capable, you don't even need to say it. The way that your society lives, the way that your country runs, the way that your people are, one, the greatest strength, in my opinion, the greatest show of strength in the world, and our founders knew this when they established this country, was a truly liberty-focused, liberty-driven, liberty-oriented society. That is one of the strongest societies in the world. And you want to know how that tends to be the case? Because more people than ever want to destroy and tear down a liberty-oriented society, a society that has freedoms. They're afraid of the fact that those people are genuinely, like, free. And when I say they, I'm not actually talking about a foreign influence. I'm talking about the one that sits right in our backyard. They can't bear the thought of people being armed as effectively as they are. They can't bear the thought of criticism. They can't bear the thought of people having something to say about how they're being governed. They can't bear the idea that, you know, the people are dissatisfied. But when you have a liberty-oriented society, and that's what made America amazing. That's what made it unique, is because we're founded on the basis of liberty. We're founded on the basis of these principles. That was strength, and it never had to be spoken. After we were founded, it didn't even have to be said. The world knew that we were unique through action, not having to sit there and put it in everybody's face of how strong we were. That's the bottom line. So when it comes to peace through strength, I to be honest, I don't even think we have it anymore. It's crazy. One of the longest running themes that you'll find in history about a people, being assailed by their own governments, abused, is the people that abuse. It always starts off with something subtle. It always starts off with something that is, not overwhelming. It's not overt, right? It becomes this situation that when they realize how much they can take from you, and they realize that it's very hard to do that when you have a people that are liberty oriented. They have to trick you. They have to try and make excuses to get you to sacrifice it little by little. And ultimately, they can't stand it because it's not within their control. So they have to do everything in their power to make that happen. The United States government is one of the most overbearing at this point. It's one of the most overbearing, monstrous apparatuses of government control ever seen in the history of humankind. It really is. It is absolutely repugnant and abhorrent how big it's gotten. Thus is why I refer to it as an empire and not a republic anymore, because the patterns show us what an empire is. And to look at it any other way, ignoring history, ignoring the patterns, ignoring the signs, I mean, you're free to do that. But in the end of the day, look, it is what we have. And I've suggested, and I've had a long-running theme, that if we want any chance of restoring the liberty in our country and any country around the world, you have to start with the community level. You have to start from the ground up. Liberty is best served and best defended in our communities. It is best rebirthed in our communities. That's how the founders started theirs. And history shows us that liberty is best birthed and defended in our communities. And at the highest level, probably our states. And the founders understood this too, because when you look at the 9th and 10th Amendments, this was emphasized overwhelmingly. One, the 9th Amendment explains that, and this is a very summarized version, right? But even the rights that are not acknowledged in the Bill of Rights are still the rights that we have to retain, right? They belong to us. Then you have the 10th Amendment, which talks about the fact that the state itself is a sovereign body and it has its own right to exist. And when you look at where all of this stems from, it starts from the people that created the states. The states created the Constitution. The Constitution created the federal government. All of this stems from the people. So therefore, liberty stems from the community level. And this is a very, very important thing for people to understand. It's very fundamental for people to understand it. And I can't say that enough. So it really is drastic. And look, I'll say this right now, because I see I've seen several inferences as it pertained to Israel, and I've brought up Israel several times. They are not, in my mind, there is nobody that's above criticism. There's nobody that's above anything like that, and I don't care what anybody says. That is including Israel, and you can have your positions, and I will, you can either find common ground. You can agree, you can disagree, but I know where I stand on that. And patterns also show us a lot too, as it pertains to that. And it looks like we have Scott Horton here. So I'm going to bring up Scott. Scott, it's great, man. Good to see you.
I'm sorry I'm late. I screwed up the time zone, but actually that's a lie. I just went overtime with Daryl recording Provoked for tomorrow, and I totally forgot about this. It was a mistake to schedule this right after Provoked. We almost always go overtime.
Hey, I will say, to be fair, that is a totally legitimate thing, because I love the podcast with you and Daryl. It's so good. And when I first started, I kind of covered about you and put it out there about your show and Provoked with you and Daryl. And I'm here to tell you, you guys are hitting a lot of home runs. I really enjoy it, and highly recommend people go and watch it. So, but it's great to have you here, brother.
Thanks, man. Happy to be here. Sorry about the delay.
Yeah, no worries. I was kind of just going on kind of a Liberty rant about the musings and the woes of the world, and just a kind of a good primer before you came on, I think.
Sure.
So I guess the topics tonight, and you're free to kind of go in as deep or as far as you want to go with this, but really kind of picking up where we started or ended last time, surrounding NATO, Russia, Ukraine, kind of like the empire of the United States as we are. Because I mean, I don't know that we're really a republic anymore. We have that are, we have some things that kind of twinkle in the background, right? But it's far from where it was. So,
So now refresh my memory. The last time I was on, we did the Middle East, and this time we're doing Russia. Is that it?
Yeah. Yep. Okay. Yeah. And I gotta say, the Middle East thing was great. I was super happy to have you on and cover that. So.
Okay, great. Well, thank you. I'm glad it was useful for you. So yeah, look, it's essentially what it is it's the same story, only it's in Eastern Europe instead of the Middle East this time. But the deal is, it's the same project of what they called the neoconservatives called benevolent global hegemony, meaning that essentially at the end of the Cold War with the Soviet Union, at the end of the 1980s, beginning of the 1990s, the question was, now what? Mm-hmm. And then the answer was, the American consensus was, we want to come home. We want what was called the peace dividend, where we get to cut all those bombers in half and then keep the money.
Sure.
But of course, the defense establishment didn't want that. And the Israel lobby didn't want that. And various vested interests in the national security state. There had never been, after Ike Eisenhower warned of the military-industrial complex, there had never been any comeuppance for that, right? Sure. There was never any accountability. We had the Church and Rockefeller hearings in the 70s about abuses by the CIA and that kind of thing. But as far as like, why do we have this military empire, and do we need it forever? And even like at the end of the Cold War, when they were slashing bomber fleets and H.W. Bush was dismantling nuclear weapons by the tens of thousands and this kind of thing, they never really said, okay, everybody, like, let's all have a big conference and figure out, like, just how far are we going with this? What are we doing here? And H.W. Bush himself short-circuited the process of disarmament by launching Iraq War I. And that's sort of, he announced the New World Order, and that was a big deal. Now, part of it, too, was that while America was distracted by the first Gulf War in 1990 and 91, the Germans were moving ahead of us on breaking up Bosnia. And the Bush administration said, well, listen, we want to make sure that the United States of America remains the dominant force in Europe. If it's not us, it will be the Germans. And so we have to make our move.
Sure.
And in fact, why were the Germans doing this? Part of the reason the Germans were doing this is because they had been slow getting on board for Iraq War I. And so they were embarrassed because now everybody's doing it and it's all the rage and everybody loves it. And the Germans kind of look like jerks. So now they got to do something important for their own domestic politics and say, look at us. We're recognizing the independence of Slovenia and Croatia.
Yeah.
Well, Right? Like, God dang it. And then so Bush goes, oh no, I was distracted by Iraq. Now I have to catch up. So then he recognizes the independence of Bosnia.
Yeah.
Which is what really touches off the war there, because you have a bunch of Serbs who live in Bosnia who are now going to be separate from Serbia, which is the dominant nation in the, or the dominant sort of country in the nation of Yugoslavia.
Sure.
If you want to put it that way. So that was what led to this terrible war. But it was this doctrine of, no, we have to stay. We have to make sure that NATO is not any new European army led by, say, for example, France and Germany combined, but that NATO led by the United States remains the dominant force in Europe. And I remember this even in the 1990s, Margaret Thatcher denouncing any German and French plan to create a European army. She like screeched that at the top of her lungs. They are trying to supplant NATO and kick America out of Europe, and I won't stand for it. You know, this kind of thing. So that was the British position too. Now, so that's the right. So this is the question. The question is, now that the Soviet Union is gone, now what? And the answer is America ain't going anywhere. In fact, what we need to do is expand. So as we covered the story in the Middle East of maintaining hegemony in the Middle East, they did the same thing for Europe, and it was the same neoconservatives. In their defense plan and guidance of 1994, is written in 92, in the aftermath of Iraq War I by Paul Wolfowitz and Scooter Libby and Zalmay Khalilzad. And it said that now America is the guarantor of world order, and we are so much more powerful than every other nation that we'll make it the permanent policy that we'll prevent the rise of any near-peer competitor or even a combination of other nations, any kind of a regional alliance to challenge our power. And we won't stand for it. We'll bomb them before we let them get that far. And we will maintain dominance throughout the planet. And thus, we are the guarantor of security of the planet. So, in a way, it's the one world government conspiracy, but in reverse. It's not what we see right now. Russia, China, and India gang up like they're building a world government over us. It was us declaring a world government over them. What we see happening in the last week here is them saying no and declaring independence from us. They're not taking us over. They're just saying, finally, screw you, as our new world order finally falls apart. But this is essentially the thing that they've been trying to foist on the world, this era that they hoped would be permanent, this era of American dominance. And so now I'll try to do this fast. I'm not very good at it, but I'll try to do it in this way. Okay. The Bush administration, they absolutely did promise not to expand the NATO alliance in order to get the Soviets to acquiesce to the reuniting of Germany. And then they broke that promise, and they pretended that they would make NATO a political organization instead of a military one, and that they would replace it with the CSCE, later the OSCE, and then later the Partnership for Peace, and that Russia and all the Eastern European nations would all join at the same time together. And so it would all be fine. We won't be moving the dividing lines east. We'll just be erasing them. But all along, they knew they were lying, and that what they were doing was shining the Russians on and telling them what they needed to hear so they could get away with what they could get away with, which was not erasing dividing lines, but just moving them further east at Russian expense, right? Also, under Bill Clinton, they, carrying out that same policy, also inflicted what was called shock therapy, which was not a conversion to laissez-faire free market capitalism, but a conversion to like modern Bill Clinton-esque, Rooseveltian quasi-free markets, right? Neoliberalism, circa, 1990s model, what Bill Clinton would do, right? So this is not property rights and contracts and hard money. This is inflationary money and crony capitalism by the connected, former regime apparatchiks and then the new gangster class and the rest. And so the Russians involved, of course, bear responsibility, but Americans bear a lot of responsibility as well for helping to inflict those terrible policies on them. And then they expanded NATO. In 1999, they brought in Poland, Hungary, and the Czech Republic. And that was a big one. And then they did the Bosnia War, as I said. And then in 99, just 3 weeks after bringing the first three countries into NATO in round one, they launched an aggressive war against Serbia based on pure lies that the Serbs had slaughtered 100,000 Albanian civilians in Kosovo and were going to kill the rest if we didn't stop them, which is a complete hoax on the level of weapons of mass destruction, and completely put the lie to the claim that, look, NATO's a defensive alliance. So, and not only is it a defensive alliance, we assure you, but when you claim to be threatened by it, we don't have to listen to that crap because we know you're lying, and we know you don't really consider us a threat because we told you it's a defensive alliance. It doesn't matter if they've launched 3 wars now, including Afghanistan and Libya, and and threaten all the time, and are working together in Ukraine against Russia now. It's a defensive alliance. You hear me? Pow, pow, pow. Right?
Yeah.
And so there's that major part of it. Then George W. Bush comes to town. And Putin's brand new. He's only been in there a year when W. Bush gets there.
Sure.
They try to strike up a friendship, but Bush is just, look, the deal is we're not willing to share power. Think of it like this. Your audience, you all know about the lessons of Versailles. America, they always leave out why this is Woodrow Wilson's fault in the first place, but America helped Britain and France turn the tables against Germany so hard that they were able to inflict the Treaty of Versailles on them at the end of the First World War. And as everyone knows, this helped lead to the rise of the Nazi Party because they stripped all these territories away from Germany. They destroyed their economy. And they also helped to ensconce communist power in the East, which was a major threat, and helped to drive support for the National Socialists in response in Germany. And so they helped to cause the Soviet Revolution, and they helped to lead to the rise of the Nazi Party in response to the punishment at the end of the war and the rise of the communists and the aftermath and the rest. And that's the cause of the Second World War. So then the way I learned it in school, and even from my family when I was a boy, is America learned that lesson. And when we won World War II, we rebuilt and we befriended the Germans and the Japanese. We didn't lord it over them and kick their ass around the way the French and the British did, because we're better men than them. That's why, because we knew what the right thing to do was. Rebuild and befriend. We have no interest in conquering Japan, but in making them our closest ally, and now they're our closest friends. We forgot we ever fought, right? But the thing is, see, America occupied Germany and Japan with military total dominance, right? Yeah. We had General Eisenhower and General MacArthur telling them what to do, and they didn't have a choice, right? And they are completely under American control, and they have been, not completely, but they're terribly under American control and influence ever since then. They still have American military garrisons in their country.
Right.
Well, so at the end of the Cold War, the Bush Sr. and Bill Clinton administrations both said, listen, we've got to heed the lessons of Versailles. We got to rebuild and befriend the Russians and not treat them badly and kick them while they're down and be a bad sport, because we know what can happen. But they didn't occupy Moscow, and they didn't have the Soviet Union to lord over them and threaten them with, like they did the Germans and the Japanese. Oh, you prefer to be occupied by Joe Stalin? I didn't think so. Right. Well, we don't have that.
Right.
So is our government really willing to rebuild and befriend the Russians? No. Not if they can't control them. Why are we going to give them a leg up against us in the future kind of thing? So it's all zero-sum game thinking, because this is politics, not economics, right?
Right.
So that's the way they look at it. So they were jerks about it. They were still looking to take every advantage instead of being a good sport and saying, it's in our interest for you to be prosperous and free and to love us from now on because of how nice we were to you. That would be what a wise leadership would do. They were looking at it in much narrower terms. And, in fact, it's worth pointing out before we get too far into W. Bush, that when Bill Clinton was expanding the NATO alliance, virtually the entire American establishment was against it. Not least of all, the ambassador to Russia and his entire staff. But also, even the entire State Department was against it. And much of the National Security Council was against it. The Secretary of Defense, William Perry, was against it. And not only that, but 2/3 of the population of the Council on Foreign Relations, the most important establishment think tank in New York City, controlled by the Rockefellers, founded by the Morgans, but controlled by the Rockefellers since between the World Wars, or I guess founded by the Morgans after World War I and controlled by the Rockefellers since World War II. the major American foreign policy establishment think tank, 2/3 of the population of it said, no, we should not do this. And they came out, Susan Eisenhower, General and President Eisenhower's granddaughter, came out and wrote a joint letter signed by 70 former generals and admirals and ambassadors and former secretaries of this and that, former foreign service officers of every rank, said, what are you doing? You're blowing our great victory. Yeah. George Kennan said, and listen, I don't know how old your audience is and what people remember about this, but you need to understand that at the very end of the Soviet Union in 1991, it was the Russian government overthrew the Soviet government, right? The last of the USSR commie regime was overthrown by its most powerful constituent part, the Russian SSR, which was its own separate government, right? And which was led by Boris Yeltsin. And Boris Yeltsin entered into an agreement with the president of Belarus and the president of Ukraine that we are going to no longer recognize the authority of the USSR whatsoever. So Gorbachev had just survived a coup. Yeltsin had helped put down a coup by commie hardliners who were trying to overthrow Gorbachev for not being commie enough. Yeltsin saved him, but then overthrew him himself and said, actually, I will take power, but in the name of the right, in the name of the red, white, and blue Russian flag, not our flag, but their red, white, and blue flag. And on Christmas Day, 1991, they brought down that commie red flag. So this is what George Kennan meant when he said, why are we doing this? He said, these are the men who overthrew the Soviet Union for us. And now we are stabbing them in the back. We are betraying them. These are the guys who said we were cool, and now we are turning on them and building up a military alliance when it's totally unnecessary. Kennan said no one was threatening anyone else. There was no reason to do this. And he said our founding fathers are rolling over in their graves. And he said this is going to lead to a new Cold War, which will probably end in a hot one. He was just announcing this in the most uncertain, most uncertain terms, or least uncertain terms. And then he's saying, he goes, all the people who are now telling us that it's okay and that Russia won't react, when the Russians do react, they will say, see, that's just how the Russians are. And that's why we have to do this, is to defend Eastern Europe from Russia that they just provoked. That's George Kennan predicted that in 1997 and 1998. And so this is exactly what happened. When he did, the former Secretary of Defense, Robert McNamara, who led the Vietnam War for Kennedy and Johnson, the Kennan's rival to his right, Paul Nitze, his former protege, and then, Kennan had coined the containment policy against the Soviet Union. Nitze wanted rollback. Well, he got his rollback. Soviet Union was gone. Nitze now was siding with Kennan, saying we should not be expanding NATO. Brent Scowcroft, who was probably speaking for H.W. Bush. I don't know. I mean, Bush certainly wanted to consolidate control over Germany. But Brent Scowcroft was against NATO expansion. This is George Bush's, they co-wrote their memoirs together. This is Bush's right-hand man and national security advisor, 4-star general, and Bush Sr.'s most trusted confidant. Came out against this, right? So this is not a bunch of hippies and liberals. It's a bunch of extremely, again, 4-star admirals and generals, people who, led the foreign service in Russia. So we should not be doing this, man. Why are we doing this? And look, they knew not to get started in 1995 because they knew it would absolutely destroy Yeltsin's chances of re-election in 1996. And then they rigged the election for him. And then they only announced the NATO expansion officially after that, or at least they had already announced it, but they only made it official, really started going for it after he was safely reelected, because they knew that there was absolute consensus against this in Russia, that they would completely freak out about it. NATO was founded as an anti-Soviet alliance in the first place. And so now for it to expand its borders in this way could only be seen as aggression by them. And again, so many of America's leading foreign policy wonks said so. And I emphasize that because, I could just invoke Ron Paul and Pat Buchanan, but, Ron Paul's good on everything. So if I tell you, look, Ron Paul was good on something, you're like, yeah, I know that. And of course he's wise. And I agree with the wise thing that he said then. But I also know that no one in Washington was listening to him. And so what difference does that make? Right. So I'm telling you, forget Ron Paul. I'm telling you that 2/3 supermajority of the membership of the Council on Foreign Relations said we should not do this. And then they did it anyway. And they did it for Lockheed dollars. And they did it for Polish votes in Illinois. You know, there's these narrow parochial concerns overriding the long-term national interests, and for that matter, the long-term interests of the human species. When we're talking about the two nations who are each sitting on 7,000 nukes, most of them H-bombs. So what happens between Washington and Moscow makes every other issue in all of humanity pale in comparison, right? Like on the list of crucial issues, there's first place, and then we start counting again at 10,000th place. Nothing else matters compared to this issue. And then, so they blew it up. They sabotaged it. They knowingly did so. The advocates knew what was going to happen, and they all did it anyway. I mean, that is the very sad story. So then Bush comes. I said I was going to do the short version. Yeah, right.
No, please continue on. No, this is great.
So W. Bush comes. He tears up the anti-ballistic missile treaty. And this treaty said we can have a couple of anti-ballistic missile bases, but that's it, because it's just a part of brinksmanship. If we build more and more defensive missiles, then they build more and more offensive missiles, and vice versa and whatever. So let's just not even do that. So it was Nixon's treaty, not the Democrats. It was the Republicans' treaty. So let's just leave it at that. Bush said no, tore up the treaty, and announced that he was on this mission to ensconce these anti-missile systems in Romania and Poland, with the radars in the Czech Republic, which is against Bill Clinton's promises in 1997 not to move military equipment into the new NATO nations. And then here they are just a couple of years later, 4 years later, announced they're going to do it anyway. And by tearing up the ABM treaty, he also killed the START II treaty. And the START II treaty, America had signed it, but not yet had it submitted to the Senate to ratify. But the Russians had already signed it and ratified it. And the START II treaty banned all multiple independently targetable reentry vehicles. That is, it mandated one warhead per rocket for the entire American and Russian missile force. Now, our Minuteman missiles right now in Montana and Nebraska and the Dakotas and whatever, those are all one warhead per rocket as per a previous treaty. But the START II was going to say that's the same thing for all missiles, submarine launch and whatever you got. Well, they killed that treaty. Now, in response to this, we know now, is predicted by many at the time, that the Russians launched a massive modernization program of their nuclear weapons infrastructure and their nuclear weapons programs. And by 18, they announced they had a new heavy missile. In fact, I think they originally announced this in 15, but then they sort of re-debuted it in 2018. You have a new heavy missile that can fly around the South Pole and can carry 24 warheads. So enough warheads to kill all of Texas with just one rocket.
Correct me if I'm wrong. I'm pretty sure, wasn't that the Sarmat? I think.
Yes, the Sarmat 2.
Yep.
And then they claim a nuclear powered cruise missile that has essentially unlimited range, could fly around any defense.
Yeah, I heard about that. A very uniquely Russian thing, by the way.
Right. And then they have nuclear torpedoes that they've developed, essentially hydrogen bomb underwater drones for taking out naval bases and coastal cities. And then, of course, they're hypersonics, which they have demonstrated in Ukraine can fly at something like Mach 9 and not coming in from space, but we're talking medium range, medium altitude missiles that fire them multiple warheads at hypersonic speeds. All of this was development launched in response to W. Bush tearing up the ABM and in effect tearing up the START II, because the Russians immediately withdrew from START II. They had already ratified it, and Bush blew it up. Then, of course, there's the war in Iraq, which the Russians opposed, which Larry Johnson pointed out to me was a bigger deal, in terms of like Bush's personal anger at Putin for standing in his way on the UN Security Council on that one. And then they did all the color-coded revolutions. And these are essentially coups d'etat dressed up as popular revolutions. And they started this under Bill Clinton and continued under Bush. So it started with Clinton in Albania in 97, Slovakia in 98, Croatia in 99, and Serbia in 2000. Then when Bush came in, he did Georgia in 2003, Ukraine in 2004, did a failed one in Belarus and Lebanon in 2005, but succeeded in Kyrgyzstan in 2005 with the Tulip Revolution. And these are essentially overthrowing governments that are too close to Russia, and ensconcing pro-American leaders there. And then Bush also announced in 2008 that he was going to bring Ukraine and Georgia into NATO. Well, first of all, I skipped one. He brought 9 new countries into NATO, including the Baltic states, Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia, right on Russia's border. But he also brought in, I believe, Romania, Bulgaria, and Slovakia, and I'm not sure what all. There's like 9 of them.
How's Slovakia working out, by the way? Because they don't seem very enthused anymore.
Yeah, well, I mean, when their guys step out of line, they get shot. So that's how that works.
Yeah.
Don't tell me you're surprised. Nobody. I saw a thing where I think it was Kurt Metzger, the comedian, who was like, "Oh, that guy's gonna get shot," and then he got shot. That guy, Robert Fico.
Yeah,
I think it was Kurt Metzger was like, "Oh, that guy's cruising for a bruising."
And I will say to Fico's credit, like, he's still standing pretty strong. Him and Orban, like, and there may be one or two that I'm missing, but those guys, I have to give them some kind of credit for at least like trying to, stand up for themselves, because it's not very common right now. And they're not very well liked.
Yep. So this led Bush's declaration at Bucharest in 2008 led to the war in Georgia, because the guy that won the Rose Revolution of 2003, Mikhail Saakashvili, tried to solve his border dispute with South Ossetia and Abkhazia by launching an attack on them both, but starting with South Ossetia, which completely backfired in his face, and the Russians intervened and guaranteed South Ossetia's independence, quote unquote, from Georgia at least, and put it back under Russian protection. First time they came south of the Caucasus Mountains since the fall of the Soviet Union. And then in Ukraine, there's a lot of levels to talk about this, but basically the point is that, they say that this guy Yanukovych was just a Russian puppet. That's really not true. He was from the East and a more Russian-leaning party, but he wanted to go west. And, they said that this guy, Paul Manafort, was Vladimir Putin's secret controller of Donald Trump. In fact, Paul Manafort worked for Yanukovych for the express purpose of moving him west, moving him away from Russia and towards the United States and the European Union. He was the one who arranged it so that as soon as Yanukovych won election in 2010, the first thing he did was go to Brussels, not to Moscow. And so his whole thing was doing that. And then, as I explain in the book, and I quote authoritative sources like George Soros and Henry Kissinger, saying it was Angela Merkel of Germany who ruined the negotiations on Ukraine's ascension to, it wasn't even their membership in the EU, but just to sign this association agreement with the EU. And Soros and Kissinger both said that idiot Merkel played too hard a hardball, and her restrictions, the amount of loans and forgiveness and whatever that she was offering were way too little, and the restrictions that she was demanding in terms of austerity and the end of all subsidies and pensions for the old and whatever, that all of that was way too harsh. It was absolutely unacceptable, and that she blew it up. And they didn't seem to think that she blew it up on purpose, but that she's bad at her job. And this is what led to then Yanukovych saying, well, look, I can't join this association agreement with the EU on this basis. I at least have to postpone this. And then they launched their revolution. And it was a bunch of American sock puppets from the very beginning that launched the Maidan protest movement. And it was, American and Western European intervention that kept the thing going and going and going. I don't think I have no reason to believe this was necessarily their plan. I mean, what happened was they were trying to force a transition deal where Yanukovych would stay, but would allow all the protest leaders into his government to run his government. And they accepted that deal. But then the neo-Nazis were like, no, hell no. Any deal that doesn't require the president to leave town is null and void. And in fact, and it was we know the guy's name is Parasyuk. He was the same guy who self-confessed leader of the snipers from the music conservatory that helped heighten the tensions on the Maidan in the first place. He's the one who ran up on the stage, grabbed the microphone, and said, "Absolutely not. This deal is null and void. Forget it. We do not accept it. We don't accept any deal where the president doesn't leave town. In fact, while I'm at it, if he doesn't leave town by 10 a.m. tomorrow morning, I'll kill him myself." And this is a guy who we know is armed and meant it. And then the crowd goes, "Yes, yes, kill him." And then that was it. So then the next day, the president lived up to his part of the deal, which was to pull the police forces back as long as the protesters promised to go home. Yeah, right. And so then they just took over everything and ran him out of town. America immediately recognized the new coup d'etat junta. So I don't have any reason to believe that the CIA told that Nazi to do that, but that's just what happens when the CIA hosts a giant rally that includes a bunch of Nazis. Some of them actually want to fight. How do you like that?
Yeah.
Who would have thunk that? Some of them are perfectly happy to blow a cop's head off if it'll help to accomplish a revolution.
Oh, of course, yeah.
So anyways, and then that's what led to the loss of Crimea, and then the overreaction in the launch of the war, the so-called anti-terrorist operation in 2014. Notably, it was John Brennan, the CIA director, who went to Kiev on April the 12th and 13th, and then the war broke out on the 14th. Kiev attacked the rebels in the east, which I think was really an overreaction to the loss of Crimea. And they were just saying, "Oh my God, we can't lose sovereignty over the Donbass." So they launched this war, and they thought it'd be easy. When President Turchynov was the acting president, launched it, but then very quickly Poroshenko took power. And
I remember that.
He ran on peace and promised he would bring peace, and had made a deal with the oligarch Dmitry Firtash for his support as long as he promised peace. And as soon as he got in there, he said, "Nope, forget that. We're going to crush these rebels, but don't worry, it'll only take a few days."
Famous last words, huh?
That's right. And so then it turned into this horrible civil war, where America, of course, was back in Kiev, and we know now from much later reporting from the New York Times that the CIA was running all over that place from the very beginning, special activities division guys, and they created 12 bases, including right on the Russian border, deep underground, and running missions behind enemy lines, and all of these things the whole time, and building up the Ukrainian government. So, and military force. So then I'll just skip Russiagate, other than to say I got 75 pages in the book on it in Provoked. Not one word of it was true. I know some people's mom might still think that, yeah, but wasn't there some truth to that? No, ma'am, I'm sorry. There was not any truth to that. It was John Brennan, the same guy who led Al-Qaeda in Syria, the same guy who launched the war in Ukraine, was the same guy who was desperate to stop Donald Trump from stopping that war, and was determined and framed him for Russiagate. It was before Hillary Clinton and her friends got on board. It was John Brennan and the CIA who framed Donald Trump for treason. That's where all that comes from. And then 1 year later, the FBI told, well, let me specify, 1 year and 3 months later, when they were launching the special counsel investigation, the FBI told CNN, well, if we can't overthrow him with the 25th Amendment, at least we can rein him in and prevent him from changing our Russia policy. And that was exactly what happened. You saw they impeached him when he tried to change our Russia policy in the Ukraine Gate thing, after they were done framing him. After the frame up job on Russiagate fell apart, they went straight for the Ukraine Gate hoax, within 3/4 of a year to drive him out of power. Literally the third time an American president was impeached in all history. It was for supposedly, but not really, temporarily holding up an arms deal to Ukraine.
Yeah.
If you could believe that. The president of the United States, he doesn't have the authority to do that. No. Anyway, so they did all that. They completely hemmed him in. But the point is, he kind of fell for it too. And to protect his, it's funny, he'd like to say to protect his right flank, but in fact, to protect his left flank from the liberal Democrat feminists and metrosexual lobby, he armed Ukraine to the teeth with, sophisticated anti-tank weapons. They only gave tow missiles to Al-Qaeda in Syria, but the Nazis in Ukraine, they get javelins, and so these are the major reasons for the run up to the war. Was one, the ongoing civil war in the East, which America was accomplished to and was refusing to end, and continue to arm up the Ukrainian government for their effectiveness in that war, while at the same time standardizing Ukraine's military to be a de facto member of NATO, even without that promised Article 3, Article 5 protection and designation. So how that works is what they call interoperability. And what that means is you're going to redo your entire command and control structure, your rank, your everything, your divisions and your brigades and your whatever is going to be the way we say. All your communications equipment is going to be Motorola brand, standard NATO stuff. As much as possible, your military equipment from, your 5.56 standard NATO round through your whatever, we're going to try to get you to transform as much of your military from its former Soviet self to a new NATO standardized military, and the American taxpayers will pick up the tab for the whole thing. But then what's the point of that? The point of that is that if America ever gets into a war with Russia, or more particularly, if NATO ever gets into a war with the Russian Federation, that means that Ukraine's military would be just another auxiliary military under American control, no different than the Hungarians and the Latvians and the Germans and the Poles, right? They'll be under NATO's Supreme Allied Command, and you're just another army fighting for us. We're not promising to go to war for you the way we promised to go to war for Germany and Poland, but you are promising to go to war for us. If it comes down to it, we're going to put you to work, right? So that's the point, is making them a de facto member of NATO without the war guarantee is essentially beside the point, because it means that we're making them a powerful enough military force that they are then an independent threat to Russia on their own ground, at least on paper, at least. Even if not like in full context. But then also, it means that if America really does follow through and bring them into NATO, it means that their ongoing border dispute in Crimea and their ongoing border dispute in the Donbass now becomes a matter of controversy, not between Ukraine and Russia, or even a civil war inside Ukraine, but now becomes a dispute between NATO and the Russian Federation over where these lines are. And, at one point, Putin snapped at this French reporter, says, don't you understand? You bring Ukraine into NATO right on the face of it. I say Crimea belongs to Russia.
Yeah.
You say it doesn't. You say it still belongs to Ukraine, and that I'm just illegally occupying it, which means that if you attack it, I say I'm defending it, but you say you're defending it. So what that means, lady, is that you get into a nuclear war with Russia and you lose Paris for Sevastopol.
Yeah.
You dig it? And like, he's actually like, usually doesn't get mad. It's like one time he's kind of snapping at this lady. Like, let me spell this out for you. Okay.
Yeah.
This is why NATO membership for Ukraine is intolerable given certain, current circumstances.
Yeah.
So this is the cause of the war. And he warned, and Biden refused to negotiate in good faith. Biden's policy was, we'll warn the Russians not to do it, but we will not negotiate in good faith to prevent the war from happening. We'll just go ahead and back Ukraine, and we'll inflict a strategic defeat on Russia. We'll bog them down, just like we did to the Soviets in Afghanistan in the 1980s. Just like the bin Ladenites tricked us into doing to ourselves in Afghanistan from 2001 through 2021. They were avowedly trying to replicate that same so-called self-inflicted wound onto the Russian Federation by dragging them in. And they said it over and over again, and they were clear they didn't want a deal from the beginning. They wouldn't negotiate to prevent the war. Once the war broke out and early negotiations began, they moved to intervene to prevent the negotiations. Once Ukraine got their greatest success, and which they did destroy them in March and April of 22. Then when the Ukrainians had their greatest success in September of 22, and America's chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Mark Milley, said, listen, we've assessed the situation. This is as good as it gets. You guys should negotiate now while you're only this far behind and not worse. But no, they were overruled by Antony Blinken and the State Department. And we knew this at the time. There were indications of this at the time. But the New York Times later ran a story after he left power called Secretary of War about how he absolutely was the one who intervened and said, don't listen to Mark Milley. What does he know about war? Listen to me. I say keep the thing going. All we need, we'll launch our major counteroffensive of the winter of 22, which you might remember never happened because the ground never froze solid enough.
Right.
They had a mild winter, so they put it off to the spring, but then it rained all spring long, so they couldn't launch it then. So they didn't launch it till the summer, till the beginning of June 2023, at which point the Russians had half a year to place landmines in between them and their enemies, and the counteroffensive went absolutely nowhere. And the Ukrainians have been fighting an absolutely losing war ever since then. They haven't had a serious counteroffensive since then, other than their incursion into Kursk, which just cost them a bunch of men and a bunch of territory in Donetsk, and they weren't able to hold on to any of that territory inside Russia itself. That was a tactic to try to force the Russians to the table. Didn't work. They just said, we'll keep fighting. We don't care. We got, like the Taliban used to say, you got watches, but we got time. And so then I'll wrap up my rant with this, my friend, is I believe that Donald Trump is sincere and that he really did want to end this war, but that he just got reelected the second time at the wrong time. And, and I think it's true that this war would not have happened if he'd been there. I think he would have negotiated in good faith and prevented it. But Joe Biden started, well, look, Putin escalated the Democrats' war to an incredible degree, and that's on him. But it was Joe Biden's policy really did so much to provoke it. And now that it's on, the Russians are winning, but they're winning in super slow motion. They're taking inches a day, sometimes miles a day, but it's a big country. It's the size of Texas. It's a huge country. And so they still only control about 3/4 of Donetsk. They control about all of Luhansk. They don't control all of they still have about a quarter, which is hundreds of square miles of Donetsk still to take. Now they have signaled that in negotiations, they're willing to back way down on Zaporozhye and Kherson, these other two oblasts that they've claimed to annex between the Donbass and Crimea. And where they're saying we could freeze those lines where they are instead of demanding the historic borders of those two provinces, which is huge. That's a major climb down because there are even major cities inside those borders left to be claimed. And in Kherson, 1/3 of Kherson is on the other side of the river, the western side of the river there. So they would have to finish winning the war where they can just go wherever they want, do whatever they want to take the rest of Kherson. So the fact that they're willing to admit that and climb down and say, look, we want all of the Donbass, but we're willing to settle for half of Zaporozhye and Kherson, that's a pretty good deal. But Ukraine would have to turn around and walk away from the quarter of Donetsk that they still control. And they're not going to do that.
No, exactly.
So Donald Trump can say time out, but the Ukrainians, look, in Vietnam, when America quit Vietnam, the government in Saigon just went up like a puff of smoke. Same thing in Afghanistan, right? When we left Afghanistan, there's no way in the world that government in Kabul was going to stand. It was just a house of paper mache cards. It was nothing, right? In this case, no, you still have a national government in Kiev and you still have an armed force, right? This is not the Afghan National Army, which is a smoke and mirrors sock puppet pretend regime, right? This is a real military for what it's worth. Now, without our support, it's going to have to break and run and become an insurgency pretty soon, like Saddam's Fedayeen, but they're not really going anywhere. And if you ask them, at least their leaders, it's a conscript army, but this is what counts. You ask their leaders, they don't want to quit. They're not done losing yet. And if you remember during Iraq War II, they would say, we can't leave now, or then the men who died in the war will have died in vain.
Yes.
We have to keep going to prevent it from being a sunk cost fallacy. It'll be a sunk cost if we quit now. But if we finish winning, then all those lives that we've thrown away will have finally amounted to have been worth the cost of the sacrifice in the end, right? And then so that's the attitude here is, what the hell do you mean you're willing to throw in the towel while we're still in the fight, right? No way. And because we're talking about a bunch of fanatical Nazis to the right of the president, that means complete with death threats against him, including in the London Times just last week. They said, oh no, if he tries to win, if he tries to negotiate a peaceful settlement, he'll be a corpse politically and then literally. And they had threatened to kill Poroshenko before him and Zelensky numerous times, especially Andriy Beletsky and Dmitry Yarash. And by the way, I don't know if you
Yeah.
saw this, but I actually have a new article on antiwar.com this week with my co-author John Weeks called Blitzkrieg Blowback, predicting or at least raising the possibility of the danger that Andrei Belitsky, one of the most important neo-Nazis and just plain old Nazis in the country there, who's the leader of the 3rd Army Corps, which is previously known as the Azov Battalion, that they're trying to normalize him and groom him and prepare him to be the new Führer of Ukraine, after Zelensky is gone. And so I think that this is a real danger. And of course, it raises the real danger of further Russian intervention at some point. They get a timeout and then a Nazi takes over the country. They're just going to launch the war again. So this is, I think, as I said in the book, and in fact, as I said in a speech that I gave right after the war escalated in 2022, I think the Russians have really kind of screwed themselves in this way, where now that they've taken the pro-Russian population out of the country, they've got nothing but anti-Russians left. And in this case, we're talking about descendants of Adolf Hitler. So like, like real extremely far right people from the far west of the country,
it's and I think that's an important position. And I think also when you look at what I found fascinating after looking back over the whole buildup from like 14 all the way up until even today is I was always fascinated with the media and how they dealt with this whole thing. Because from 14 all the way up to 22, they were just like, oh, all of these Nazis and all of the, they openly talked about them. And I remember years ago watching a documentary. I don't know if it was near the end of when Vice News was still kind of like actually doing documentaries or their stuff that they do today, but it was they did a whole thing where they were like down in the trenches with like the militia on the Ukrainian side, like with the actual like Ukrainian side and not the Russian side, and they're just like, so like I remember some of the reporters being like, hey, we kind of notice you have some Nazi paraphernalia over here. Like, what's that all about? And they explained it, and they explained it like with a lot of pride too. They're like, oh yeah, like, this is what our forefathers, and it was amazing. And then it's like 22 happened, and a few people called them on it. And they're just like, no, that never happened. Like, what are you talking about?
I know
there's no such. Don't look over here. Like, we never said any of that. And so people just read Racedom.
In the book, there are really 3 sections. The reason the book is so thick, it's really long, but it's because there's so many subjects covered. I try not to belabor any one point too long, except for 3. NATO promises against expansion. The neo-Nazis in Ukraine, and Russiagate. Those subjects, I go ahead and I absolutely beat a dead horse because I think essentially the burden is really on me. Really, the whole it's true for the whole book, but especially on these 3 subjects. These are 3 of the most controversial and debated subjects. And so I want to just absolutely prove my case. I don't care what you've read, supposedly debunking the NATO expansion promises. When you read my book, you will know that you were wrong when you thought those other people weren't lying to you before. I'm right. They're wrong. That's it. Black and white. I win. Everyone else loses. Don't lie to me. You can't. It's right there. And no one who read my book will ever be, impressed by any lesser argument from the other side ever again. Same thing with the Nazis in Ukraine, and same thing with Russiagate. You read my Russiagate section, you'll be like, dang. Boy, I thought I hated the FBI after they burned them little Branch Davidian babies to death. This is as bad as that somehow. I don't know. It's really and then the Nazis in Ukraine. And it really is true. And look, if anyone in your audience ever had a history class in government school, I don't know, but like I learned this when I was a kid that there were some people in Eastern Europe who welcomed the Nazis as liberators from the communists. And then they found that, these Nazis are actually pretty mean hombres too. And then the communists won the war anyway. And then so everything was hell and whatever. Well, that's what happened in Ukraine as well. And there were already fanatical far right National Socialists in the east of the country anyway. They hated the Poles more than they hated the Jews. They wanted to drive all the Poles out of what was then far eastern Poland, because of Woodrow Wilson and the way they had drawn the borders after the First World War. But they wanted to kick all the Poles out and make that part of Western Ukraine. And so, and they hated the Jews too, and they helped to perpetrate the Holocaust in the Second World War as, direct auxiliaries of the Stussenstaffel, the German SS. And so then these groups, of course, they were defeated in the war, and then they were adopted by the CIA. The OUN became the UPA toward the end of the war, and then that became the basis of the insurgency that the CIA backed in the Carpathian Mountains against the Soviets in a sort of stay-behind program that lasted through 1954. And so then, a lot of the refugees had fled to Canada and the United States. And even before the fall of the Soviet Union, just with the beginning of glasnost and perestroika, which meant the restructuring and the opening of the Soviet Union under Gorbachev in the mid-1980s, they started flooding back to Western Ukraine from Canada and the United States and started to establish all these organizations, and particularly, the Patriot of Ukraine group and Ukrainian self-defense and all of these things, the Svoboda Party, the Social Nationalists, and these other groups. They also created all these historical groups to write all the textbooks and to come up with all poems and slogans and to rename all the streets after their great Nazi heroes and put up statues of Stepan Bandera and his men all across the country, including at former Jewish ghettos from the war. There's now a park with a giant gleaming statue of Stepan Bandera overlooking the whole thing, and all of it. Roman Shechevich and these other guys. And so it's a really ugly history there, and it's a direct history from the guys who served Hitler in the Holocaust and World War II to their sons and grandsons creating these organizations that are the foundation of the modern Nazi movement in Ukraine today. And there's a direct, and as I show in the book, I do belabor the point all the way through and show the connectivity all the way through. And these are the groups who did, they were a bit in the background during the Orange Revolution in 04, but they were there. And then they ran the thing and led the thing during the Maidan Putsch of 14. And then they're the ones who led the country at war right away, because when they launched the anti-terrorist operation, many in the army split. I still don't know what the proportion was, but a major part of the army split and chose the rebel side. And so, and then the rest of the army was essentially disorganized and didn't know what to do. And so then the Azov battalion Nazis, went into the breach. And it's this guy, Andrei Beletsky, the guy that I'm warning is, has political aspirations. He's the guy that put together the Azov battalion and took them to war and immediately started committing war crimes against people and everything else. And he's the guy who always talks about, you always see this quote that says that our great crusade is to lead the white race against the Semitic-led Untermenschen. That means the subhumans. That's like the most often quoted phrase of these Nazis. And it comes from Andrei Beletsky, currently the Colonel Beletsky, the head of the 3rd Army Corps. And in my article, it's on antiwar.com right now and at the Libertarian Institute right now. It's called Blitzkrieg Blowback. And in that article, I linked to the entire speech where he's talking this fanatical Nazi claptrap about, the state as, the species, the Ukrainian species, right? They're not a nationality or even an ethnicity. They're a species, and they're a single organism that, must all be, to serve the greater whole and the martial, the ancient Aryan values and all of these things. And the whole speech is extremely unhinged. And I linked to the whole thing there. And it's, your typical, we'll be Supermen once we're done killing all of our enemies kind of thing. They even fantasize about a Ukrainian empire that'll dominate all of Eastern Europe and the Middle East in alliance with Iran, and like, whatever, man. But anyway, but the point being that these are real romantic types, right? They are really caught up in the things that they like believing. And they're not going away. In fact, I have one counter to that is Andrei Perubi, who is leader of Right Sector, who helped from the Svoboda Party and helped organize the Right Sector coalition during the Maidan Revolution, then later became the Speaker of the Parliament for many years. Somebody whacked him the other day, ran up and shot him in the head on the street.
That's right. Yeah, I remember hearing that.
So he was one of the dangerous ones. I have a section in my book where I say, so if bin Laden is what grew out of when we did this in Afghanistan, who's the most likely bin Laden to grow out of our support for the Nazis in Ukraine? Will it be Andrei Parubi, Dmitry Yarash, or Andrei Beletsky?
Yeah.
Well, there's one crossed off the list.
Yep.
So as I was joking in the article, these things do have a way sometimes of taking care of themselves.
For sure. Yeah.
You know, Nazis end up dead, often at the hands of other Nazis or other criminals they're dealing with, you know. We'll see what happens, but it's a real danger. And I got to say, and I document again, this whole, especially during the Civil War period, they grew up this massive Azov movement. It's far beyond just the fighters. This is really the rebirth of white supremacy in Europe. And there's really nothing like it anywhere in the world where you have avowed Nazi legions, you know, in this way. And when they go and try to hold their events around, you know, they have fight clubs and metal shows and whatever around Europe, oftentimes they're banned in Germany, France, and Poland. They've been banned and shut down because it's illegal to be a Nazi and to avowedly recruit for Nazi programs and fly Nazi symbols in those countries in Europe. Now, I'm for free speech, but I'm just saying there's a reason those countries outlaw all that stuff. And it's the kind of thing where it's absolutely criminal everywhere else in Europe, except in Ukraine. And then you even have ridiculous things where, like, you had a guy, an important general in the Ukrainian military, went to Germany. And while he was there, he went and laid flowers at the grave of Stepan Bandera and denied the Holocaust. And they kicked him out of the country. And then there was another one where you had these lower level guys went there to train. And it was a big scandal because they had swastika tattoos and black sun emblems and whatever all over their clothes. And they were kicked out of the country as well. And then the government in Kiev had to promise Germany that they will have all of their soldiers remove any swastikas from their clothing before sending them to Germany to train anymore. Like, some of this stuff is beyond parody, man.
Right. And yet it's cartoonish.
What America's involved in.
Yeah. Yeah, it's, you know, and I remember, I think it might have been on either it was Daniel Davis's show or one of the other podcasts that I listened to. And I love listening to McGregor and Larry Johnson and all of it. They're so good. They're so well read and really understand all of the things that they talk about too. But somebody had mentioned, and I don't know if you know more about this. I had only briefly heard it, but that the British were at least playing with the idea for a while of trying to groom Zaluzhny, or at least that was the thought for quite some time.
Yeah, and he's in the running. Yeah.
And you know, I do remember early after 22 kicked off and the Russians went in and, you know, more full force, that there was like kind of this thing that came back. And I think it kind of irritated Prigozhin to some degree. But there was kind of like some recognition of like respect between like the Russian officers and Zaluzhny, because they're like, okay, like he actually cares about his guys, you know, like there's, you know, he's a fighter just like us or whatever the case is. But then it's like after that initial thing where it seemed like, okay, you know, maybe they would be more appealed to somebody like that, like they felt they could deal with them. Right. You didn't really hear much of that after Zaluzhny kind of had his exodus and then, you know, obviously went west. But I am curious, like, if it's not Beletsky and it's Zaluzhny, if he's like, if there's any potential to where Zaluzhny would even deal with, I don't know that he would even be able to deal with the Russians in negotiating, because I feel like the neo-Nazis over in Ukraine just have so much power at this juncture that they would just wipe anybody out anyways. So,
well, I mean, he is a former general, so and he's the ambassador to the UK now. So there's an article I read that said that there's 4 guys who are really in the running, and Zaluzhny and Beletsky are 2 of the 4.
Mm-hmm.
You know, if there's anyone, Yeah, I really don't know his political standing in the country.
Right, yeah.
Being a former general, if he became president, I think he's at least potentially strong enough to really marginalize any Nazi threat to his right and go ahead and be his own strong man. And he's not a Nazi. I don't know like what all he believes. He clearly, he's
I
on
think
the
he's very
record saying he says we're not going to be a liberal democracy. We're going to be like Israel, which by the way, Israel's not at all a liberal democracy in case anyone was confused about that. He said, no, we're going to be a right-wing militarized nation, state in a permanent war like the Israelis. That's what we're looking for. So but that doesn't make him an outright national socialist, more of just like a little F fascist, you know what I mean? But yeah, pretty bad though, but just not completely caught up in sort of the romanticism of creating some new Aryan Superman with your centralized 5-year plan or what, crazy Beletsky-ite stuff,
Yeah, man, it's wild having watched so much of this unfold from 14 all the way up to even today. And I think really what gets me, and I just was listening to Daniel Davis's show today where he had Johnson on and a few others today, McGregor too. And they were all kind of pointing out just like how far down the realm of delusion that like these von der Leyen and Starmer and Macron and a gal that I mentioned in our last episode, Kaya Kallas, who's the Estonian PM, and like how so many of them are just like, no, like we can do this. And it's just like, yeah, but like with what? Like you're so dependent on the United States, and that dependency has essentially crippled you. And but they have this idea, like they feed themselves with all of this delusion, and then they feed it right over to Ukraine, just like, no, we're right here for you.
Well, look, and you're so right. They're crippling us too. I mean, look at what happened. 100%, we've essentially outsourced our foreign policy to them. Where you can have some crazy lady from some country most Americans have never heard of can get us into a war somehow. This is what in economics we call a moral hazard. Go ahead and make bad bets because I'll bail out your bank if your loans all fall through. Right. So this is exactly why we shouldn't be doing this. Is we end up with Estonian foreign ministers talking way tougher than they can back up, and
their army of
they know that we are there. So yeah, you don't want to be the big brother to a loudmouth little brat, So yeah, I mean, and look, and that it just goes to show this whole thing, just like our conversation last time. This whole thing, it just goes to show that none of this had to be this way at all. We don't have to do this. All this is so stupid. From Iraq War I and Bosnia and NATO expansion and tearing up all the treaties and acting like the arrogant hegemon. I mean, we all agree now. We were talking about this with Daryl and even with Larry Johnson. Larry Johnson who brought up on my show. So I don't even have this in the book, I don't think. I mean, I remember even thinking about writing about this because I knew that Putin had opposed the Iraq War and then complained about it as like one of his issues, but I just didn't want to get into that. I already have a whole book on the Middle East. And no, Larry Johnson was pointing out to me that that pissed off Bush and Cheney so much, dude, that he wouldn't get on board for Iraq War II and really turned them against him so hard and then back and forth from there. And I really had overlooked that. And but looking back on it, I can really see the importance of, the way that played into their thinking about him.
Oh, for sure.
But now I ask your audience, but who stands for Iraq War II now, other than Eli Lake and Jonathan Chait and Brett Stevens and John Bolton? Those are the last 4 people in America. Don Rumsfeld's dead. Those are the only people in America who are still Iraq War dead enders, right? No one else believes in that anymore. We shouldn't have done that at all. Well, in other words, Putin was right, and Bush shouldn't have been mad at him for trying to stop him from doing something stupid and wrong. He should have said, thank you, Vlad. You're a much wiser guy than me. I should take your advice. You want to be my vice president? Because this guy's fired. How about that? And so why are we holding a grudge over something where it was our guys that made the wrong call? And their side were the ones who were trying to keep us out of trouble. It's the same thing as like freedom fries. Walter Jones said, we got to rename French fries Freedom Fries because damn them French for not getting on board for our war. But you know what? Walter Jones later got on his knees and begged Jesus Christ for his forgiveness, not for the French fries thing, but for supporting the war, for getting that whole thing so wrong and for getting those guys killed. He took responsibility. He's just one member of that house, but he took his share of the responsibility for the death that he had caused. And was as sincere as anyone in turning around on that. So if the whole Republican Party is Walter Jones now, then how can the American right hold any grudge against any country that resents all the stupid things, that never even mind all the things that Barack Obama did and Joe Biden and Bill Clinton, but even the things that George W. Bush did. Right? There wasn't one president in this era that was your guy except maybe Trump. And then the worst things he did were all things where he did what the Bushes and Clintons and Obama and Biden and McCain would have had him do. Right. Not the things that he was elected by the American people to do, which is the opposite of all that, to shut down all of that. And so I think that's where we're at, man. And look, you know, the most dire issue right now is Israel-Palestine, and you have virtual consensus on the left. And I don't mean the left. I just mean the left half of American politics, including all the moderates and liberals and centrists of every kind in the Democratic Party, other than the rulers of the Democratic Party, the entire population of it, and half of the right now sides with the Palestinians. That is just absolutely huge. And it's Trump's worst issue. As I joked on, I don't know if I was joking, I predicted, I guess last December, I said, Trump might be the most Zionist president of the USA, but he may be the last. And they have made themselves so radioactive, and they just, the war party, there's just nothing legit that anyone can point to that the war party has done for us this whole time except to cause this country trouble. And people are just sick and tired of it. And so this is really our opportunity. You know, Kim and Modi and Putin all go to hang out with Xi in Beijing. Good, fine. Oh, they declared independence from our empire. Fine. They're not taking us over. They're just going their own way. Good. We weren't supposed to be an empire anyway. The unipolar moment is over, everyone. Let's have a barbecue and celebrate that now we can come home. Now we can be a normal country in a normal time. We weren't supposed to be doing any of this anyway. We're not giving in to terrorists. We're not giving in to tyrants. We're giving in to James Madison and George Washington and the prescription that they wrote for how we're supposed to run this country here. So that's it, man.
Well, and you know, I did, I may have mentioned this earlier when we first started, but I did it was an episode I think it was last Thursday. My memory serves. It's hit and miss some days, Scott, you know, but I did an episode called Washington's Warnings, and I centered it around entangling alliances. And I just kind of went through not a super expansive, but a pretty layman's way of explaining that. And it's I just think looking at all of these different things of how, you know, Washington, he wasn't perfect, but he was right on a number of different things on his farewell address. And he did a good job of putting it out there. He must just be spinning in his grave right now. Just what are you doing? You people are insane right now. And, you know, Israel, Ukraine, even NATO, in general, it's just all of these different things have just zapped us of resources, of money, of blood, of treasure, of all of these different things. And those are just a handful of examples. I mean, you've talked about so many other things, and as well as several other people. And it's when you look at the path of just destruction, and then the toll that it's ultimately taken on us as, you know, a country. I'm a big pattern guy, and when I see what the end product is, it's not good. You know, there's no way that any empire that's followed the same thing with 750 plus military bases and all of these other things that create an empire, this perpetual war state, every empire has died. And the lucky ones are the ones that die in a somewhat quiet manner. The unlucky ones are the ones that die gnashing their teeth and wailing as they go down. And And I hate to say it, but it's like, I really, I really, I I kind of have painted a picture in my head, and I'm just like, man, like, I just hope some way, somewhere, that like something comes about to where we can kind of like, in the very least, insulate ourselves. But
Yeah.
I know it's coming at some point, like,
Yeah.
and I'm a hopeful guy, but it's like,
I'm a bit
I
optimistic myself. I
yeah,
mean, like we're just talking about on the Palestine thing, people are just sick of it. People are just sick of
yeah,
it. So should we really have to go all the way to absolute economic collapse or nuclear
right,
war? Or we can just
right,
knock this off because it's stupid. Nobody
yeah,
believes it anymore. At some point, Ron Paul's right about this. You build a
yeah,
consensus, the people get what they want. Even in the Soviet Union,
right,
ultimately, the people get the government that they demand,
of
regardless of
course,
what they
yeah,
deserve or not. So I think it's on right now. The narrative is with us. We don't have the power,
yeah,
but the people agree with us.
yeah,
And so just keep doing what you're doing, man. Keep pushing the message,
yeah, absolutely,
waking
and
up
that
more people.
yeah, and and that's the big thing is like, I've been fortunate to have some really great guests, including yourself, on. And what I've found, and by the way, I've had Tom Edlam on, and
Oh,
he's
great.
amazing. He's one of my favorite people. I
He's
call him
great.
my resident economist at this point because
Yeah.
he's just a great person. But you know, uh, it seems like the common consensus for a lot of people now is just like, look, like, things are pretty bad. There are good things that are happening, and people coming over to our side and seeing things the way that we see it. But I'm very much like, we've got to just start working in our communities, because this thing has just gotten so big that trying to change the federal level is
Right.
just, it's beyond means. And if we can make a difference, even just in our community level, to some
Yep.
degree, we may still be able to come out of this pretty okay. And
Yep. And building
that's
that
where my hope
consensus.
lies.
Yep. Yep. Absolutely right.
So, well, yeah, Scott, I don't know if there's anything else you wanna add, or if you have a couple minutes after the show, but I'd love to talk with you after the show. But yeah, please, if you have anything else, feel free to go somewhere with it.
Yeah, let me just plug real quick.
Yeah,
I've been doing a lot of work lately on this, and it's not quite ready yet, but I've finished some editing. I feel like I'm at a milestone in the production here. So very soon we'll be launching. You can see right here the logo, the
oh
Scott
yeah,
Horton Academy of
nice.
Foreign Policy and Freedom. It's my own Liberty classroom that Tom Woods built for me. And if people just go to scotthortonacademy.com, you can put your email address in there, so you'll be the first to know when we go live. It's
Awesome.
me, and then also a bunch of other great guys doing long form courses on all things foreign
That's awesome.
policy and liberty. So that's all, scotthortonacademy.com. And thanks, man, for having me. Good to be with you again.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, I'll if you have a couple minutes, I'll talk with you after the show. Aside from that, thank you everybody for coming out, watching the Sentinels of Liberty podcast. Thank you for joining me and Scott tonight for this conversation, and for the conversation that ensued even before. Really enjoy it. And everybody, that came in, and everybody that sees this afterwards, like, you are building towards part of that solution, and you're building towards, more hope as time goes on. So don't ever think that you're alone in this, because there's a lot of us out there that really want to do something better, and we do value liberty, and we do value, a lot of the good things that come with liberty. And so that the fight's not lost. Like, even if you think it is, it's that hope isn't gone. So with that being said, have a fantastic night, everybody. Thank you again for joining the Sentinels of Liberty podcast, and I look forward to seeing you on Saturday at 1700 Central Standard Time. I'm still not sure yet what I'm going to do, but I think I'm going to do another Washington's Warning. So check out for that. And till next time, take care.